In this chapter 13, the metaphysical properties of man, metaphysical properties are what belongs to a thing in virtue of its nature. For instance, man is by nature rational. Therefore, he's talky. They're the properties of being rational. So you're saying the same thing but looked at in a different way. He's laughy, he's social, he's domestic, he's political, self-corrective, and therefore progressive. This is what belongs to man. Scientific. You might say not everybody's scientific. What about a little child that says, "Mummy, clouds up there. Looks as if it's going to rain." That's a scientific act. Knowledge through causes. That's what a scientific act is. Of course, there are degrees of perfection in these various acts. Yes. So, artistic. When I try to draw things, people look at it and say, "Did you spill the ink?" Wise. We seek ultimate causes. That's what a wise man does. Ultimate causes. "But why, honey? Why did you do that? Why? Etc., etc. Religious. We pay homage to our Creator. Religious. Lots of people, you hear this talk on television. He did a religious act or something else. You heard about the fellow in the plane, don't you? The plane was going to crash and somebody else, they knew it was going to crash. Could somebody do something religious? So some wise guy took up a collection. A bond back. A ligament is a bond. Binds muscles and bones, etc. together. That's what religion is. A bond back. God created us. We have a bond back with Him. We pay homage to Him. Religion is a practice. Usually when they're talking about religion, they should be talking about theology. And more often than not, it's about philosophy, not religion at all, what they're talking about. So, but religion is not a knowledge, it's a practice. But today, Catholic universities have departments of religious studies, so they won't have to teach theology, and they can meet the requisites of the enemy. Sportive. Man not merely is playful like other animals, for he recreates more than his neuromuscular system through playfulness. He keeps score. And he also recognizes leadership. Napoleon said about the English, who won so many wars on the continent, the wars of Europe were won on the playing fields of Eton. In other words, that great public school, which is not public but private in England. Funny how they all call public schools private schools, they call them public schools. So man's sporting ability is different from the animals. They merely develop their neuromuscular system by rolling over and all that sort of things. Like the two little black bears I watched as the mother was watching them and watching me in Banff in the Canadian Rockies on one occasion. The two little black bears were rolling over and over and over, developing their neuromuscular system and expelling neurotoxins from their bodies. Weepy. Man has the capacity for weeping, and that's different from a dog. Grammatical. Has the capacity for speaking grammatically. Inventive, friendly, free, moral, etc., etc. Moral goodness or moral badness. Each of the above properties names an application of man's rational power in some particular human activity. For example, to be artistic is to apply reason to the products of human activity, so that art is defined as right reason about things to be made. Brutes manifest none of these properties. Each of these properties consists of an application of man's rationality in a particular situation, and so on. Man makes progress in all that he does. Brutes, on the other hand, are fixed in all that they do, according to their species. Of course, sometimes they can progress within the limitation of what their species causes them to do. But usually it's man training them that causes them to do that. If you have a bee, a European bee in Europe, it makes hexagonal cells. You have a European bee in Australia, they still make hexagonal cells. But it took Western men thousands of years to learn that the hexagon is the strongest way you can put concrete together and things like that. So I've got some notes here about the talking bee and about the laughing bee. Man needs to talk to convey his concepts, his judgments, and his reasonings. Brutes don't talk because they have nothing to say, since they cannot abstract the universal. Many can imitate speech. You don't ever see dogs having a chat. At least not the dogs I've seen. But then I don't drink that kind of drink. But I do. But so we don't see animals having a chat. People have been taken up with elephants making a rumble noise that can be heard miles away. They've been taken with that. Well, what is that? Is it any more than rumbling? Certainly they can have natural signs. When a monkey squeals, when there's danger around, every animal will do something like that when there's danger. When they're having fun or enjoying meals or something, I've watched pigs pushing one another away, just shoving their nose in on one of my uncle's farms. So some animals even pair off for life, storks, swans. But again, this is not the same kind of social order we find in the domestic society, the family. And the domestic society has the conjugal society and the familial society. And the common sense of mankind can see that the familial society is when you have children. Conjugal society, yoked together. Con, which means same as cum in Latin, meaning with or together. Jugos, meaning yoked. So when Bob goes into the church, he comes out and says, "The yoke's on me." So everybody recognizes that the family ultimately exists for children. As far as I can see down through history, this is the first age that didn't recognize that. I've had students say, and these were good kids, so what if they don't want children? My usual answer has been, supposing I ask you to paint my house. I'm going to pay you $2,000 to paint my house, and you agree. You don't intend painting it. I don't intend paying you. What sort of a contract is that? Or even if only one of us thought that. It's a stupid contract. Well, likewise, to take on what is a natural contract, it's a purely natural one, designed by nature for the reproduction of the species. That is why a government has a very serious obligation to pay attention to what its people are doing. If they're aborting children, a government ought to be frightened at that. It's wiping out the society. And the marital society exists for the sake of continuing the species. There are... I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Would a polygamous society succeed or fulfill its nature, for procreation?
We'll deal with that. First of all, I must mention, will be no class next Friday. It's a holiday weekend, and probably so many of you might be going away or have something to do. So we'll abandon class next week. But the following week, we'll take it up again. With or without Mr. Venari. He's not going to be here. Now, there are two properties of the marital bond: the unity and indissolubility. Let's look at that. Oops. Here's that chair. Unity and indissolubility. Now, the unity. Supposing we have what's the term? I can't think of the term just for a second. We'll just call it many wives. Or we have many husbands. Now here we are, many wives, say 1, 2, 3. We'll call them Mary, Jane, Betty. How about that? And here's one husband, Bob. Here we have Tom, Joe, and Bob. Mary. So he could fertilize all 3 women. Yes, and produce the result, reproduction. Here, they can't all fertilize one girl, Mary. It's impossible. Just one of them fertilizes her. Now, if that is so, which is more natural? Many wives or many husbands? Many wives is more natural, isn't it? Achieves the end for which matrimony exists better. So, we'll rule that out. But some of the objections to this are going to apply to that too. So, May, she's longing for Bob. Just at this time of the month, she's longing for his companionship. But Jane's there. There's one thing about women, they can display jealousy, can't they?
Oh, boy.
Unlike men.
Let's not get on that one.
Yeah.
Right, now what are you going to do? You're going to have trouble here. Now, Betty says, here these two are arguing over who's going to sleep with him tonight, but I want to. You can see the problem, can't you? Certainly, he could fertilize all 3 of them, but there's more to it than that. You see, the marital society, let's say B and B, first you've got mutual love, mutual aid, and a natural remedy for concupiscence, in other words, sexual desire. But all of that is the way to new, live man. That's the ultimate end of all of that. Nature fixed it that way. We didn't fix it that way. You might marry for all sorts of reasons. One might marry and say, well, the 2 families together can go a long way in the business world. You can do all sorts of things. Or maybe, like that girl that married a fella and said at the church door, I want to say goodbye to you. What do you mean? We just got married. Yes, I know. Now I've got you tied up for life. Because his father did something to her father years ago, and she's out for sweet revenge. The only thing is she didn't realize it was not a valid marriage. She did not have the end of marriage in view, at least permissively. It was an invalid marriage, so consequently, all he had to do is just refer to the church or whoever. It can be annulled. Nullity can be readily granted in a case like that. She slept on her face. Face, yeah. So you can see the trouble here. She has 2 children, she has 3, she has 1. She says, Bob, my children need your attention. They need to play football, go and play with them. The other one says, hey, but my kids have got to learn to swim because they're in the swimming team, they've got to have their swimming practice. And so the other one says, mine want to learn knitting. So you've got to do something with her kids. So on it goes. Jealousies split down the middle. But it does happen. There are people who are married like that in the United States. I had a Mormon sitting in my class. He was an ex-Catholic and became a Mormon, he told me. And he's sitting in the class, I said about, what do you call it? Polygamy. This is called polygamy. This is called, polygyny. This is called polyandry. Many wives, many husbands. They're both called polygamy together. And he said, oh no, you're wrong there, Dr. Waters. He said, we don't do that. Well, I don't know who's pulling whose leg, but just within the next couple of weeks after that, it was in the press about somebody being prosecuted out west for having many wives. Anyway, so it doesn't work out. It just is not feasible. It's contrary to the natural order, let's put it that way. Now, through some religious restriction, some people do practice that polygyny, many wives. You notice they don't practice many husbands, it's many wives. Usually, when it does happen, many husbands, it's usually apparently brothers. And secondly, when this does happen, it happens about 1% of the nation in which it exists. About 1%. The highest number of wives, I think it was 350 in Arabia, recorded in one textbook of ethics, Liberty, Its Use and Abuse, by Ignatius W. Cox. And he shows that it happened at about 350, I think it was. He takes the Christmas off, you see. And so, sorry about that. But he had all these wives, and the result is young men cannot get wives when it does happen. Cannot get suitable wives. Young men are starved for family, life and development, and it harms the nation very, very badly. So, and it's usually older men have the wealth and ability to attract the young women. I haven't got much money on me at the moment.
So it's truly against nature.
Truly against nature, yes. As the common sense of mankind has shown. What happens when they do have these wives? They have to conquer them in some way or another. Or bribe them to come in. Or have eunuchs de-sext men in order to keep an eye on them and keep the others out. I remember somebody arguing with me, I think I was about 21 at the time, 22, saying about a certain laundry in Sydney run by nuns. And the court sent girls that were caught up to some mischief or other, sent them, instead of sending them to prison, they sent them to this laundry where they worked. And he said, telling me about they've got this high wall around it in Tempe, is a suburb of Sydney, not very far from where I lived. He says, they're imprisoning those girls. That's what they're doing. No, I says, to keep dirty old men like you out. He didn't like that. However, so there it is about the society. You see whether it's possible. It's contrary to the natural order. That's what ethics is all about, the nature of man. The objective rule of morals. How do you just know what's right and what's wrong? I remember seeing a pretty bad skin flick. It came up on the screen while my parents were watching a movie, and I was in Sydney at the time, and my mother let out an expression. She says, getting that way you don't know what's right and what's wrong anymore. No, Mum, they don't know what's right and what's wrong anymore. That's the problem, not us. But we have to take into account human nature.
Adequately understood.
Good man. Human nature adequately understood. He always answers that correctly. Give him a peanut, somebody. So it's what was I going to say? Yes, well, it's contrary to the natural order. Even if it is practiced, it's still contrary to the natural order. Remember the Jones compound? They're all, what a mess you end up with those things. They're going against the common sense of mankind tells us that too. They know that. And they know where it's practiced that there's something wrong. So there's the objective rule of moral. How you know what's right and what's wrong? By understanding human nature adequately. We work all that out in ethics. How do I know when I do something right or wrong? Conscience, which is a judgment of the intellect, a judgment of my action. Did I act in accordance with human nature adequately understood or not? Conscience is merely the intellect reflecting over my act. So, my friends, civil society and the marital society are much more complex than anything that animals have. All animal cries, as the great Aristotle said, all animal cries are about two things: eaties and sexies, food and sex. And the girl called out in one of my class, just sounds like my boyfriend. So, my friends, There's a vast difference between saying that evolution might be something that happened and evolution did happen. If it did happen, then we've got a hell of a lot more things to explain. How did it happen? How did it go against the natural order? And all these things are not displayed by animals. They're all displayed by man in some manner or another. Even retarded boys. I was at a lakeside institution in Australia on one occasion, visiting there. I'd heard about it, and they asked us to drop in and say hello anytime we're passing. The brothers there that were running this place for these retarded boys said they loved more than anybody else could possibly love. They had human qualities which no animal would have. Occasionally we hear of an animal doing something which is different from what other people might do. For instance, it'll rescue its master. Well, every animal, every being, living thing has some idea of self-defense. Even a plant will recoil at something that's obnoxious to it. If it's not got water, not got this or not got that, they take defensive measures. That's a part of the very nature. But man alone can build and construct articles which are artistically built according to the art of man to defend himself.
But isn't that an act of altruism on the dog's part?
Oh yes, coming from love, springing from love. A natural love of the dog for his master.
But isn't altruism a spiritual?
Well, it could be, but in this case, it's just acting according to his nature. It's only an instinctive act, you see.
But he could be working against his own existence, you know.
Yeah, but they can't perceive that.
They can't perceive that.
No.
Plus, too, it's the nature of a dog to be protective of man, whereas a cat will never do that for you.
That's true,
Or,
yeah.
or a lamb, or
Yeah.
a
Cat is
dog.
supposed to be the most faithless animal that's alive.
Cat?
Yeah, a cat, yes.
Oh, really?
But a dog, that's their very nature, to be like that. But they don't do anything else, don't display anything else. It doesn't say, Master, I'm coming to get you. Nothing like that. And all the other properties, those metaphysical properties of man, they're not displayed by a dog. If they are, they're not the dogs I've seen.
Or you could be sick for eating right and just have it attack you.
You what?
Or you could be sick for eating right and just have it attack you.
Right?
One thing about animals, all animals, you've got to be very careful. They act by instinct. I still remember Kathleen in Koala Park in Sydney. Well, it's really out of Sydney, just out. It's in a state park, and somebody's started a zoo there. Fantastic. You want to see the birds that come out of the bush when they're feeding the birds in the cages. The birds that come out of the bush by the thousands, all after a free handout. I think I might have mentioned to you, they had a rock python which its body was like that. And it's curled up. I remember seeing it curled up around a tree they had there. You know, it could be as long as, I don't know, well, it wouldn't be as long as this room, but up to about here probably. But the body's something like that. And I said, what happened to your python you had in there? That big python. He said, oh, somebody stole it. How in the name of heaven would they carry out a python like that thick? It was about 10 inches across the body. And who'd want to steal it anyway? So but all the animals there, Kathleen, I remember playing with a kangaroo. It was taller than herself, and she was a girl about that high. And the kangaroo will play with its front legs like this. And she's doing it too. I said, Kathleen, get back, get back. He likes me. Look, he's playing with me. He likes me. That's our interpretation. We tend to humanize these things in animals. Because without the drop of a hat, the kangaroo could go back on his very strong tail, and the hind legs could come up with claws that big. They'll rip a dog open. What they might do to a young lady like that, I don't know. But I was scared to think. But we put this interpretation on him. He likes me. Well, you read so often of somebody, a beautiful dog. Recently in Buffalo, there was a dog there somewhere. I remember reading about that they said it was normally very placid, very playful. But it ripped into somebody and tore the face off or something, wasn't it?
That was
Pardon?
That was in ape, I think. A gorilla or?
No, there was a dog in Buffalo did something like
The
that.
ape was in Connecticut.
Was that in Connecticut?
That was a chimp,
Yeah, Jim.
yeah.
It was a chump anyway.
Oh,
But you see, we can have these animals so long, they seem so placid, so gentle, and so likable, and all of a sudden their instincts move them into action in a way that we never suspected. So I warn people, be very careful of animals, very careful. Always remember the man in Ceylon, now known as Sri Lanka. This didn't happen while I was there, but I thought when I was there, I was thinking of it, how easily a man could be drinking a cool drink under a palm tree, and he's just gently stroking his black panther. Suddenly found his hand was being chewed by the black panther. He had to yell for somebody, quick, bring a gun. He had to shoot it. But it had been his pet for a long time. Just don't know, my friends. They don't have rational judgment. The people who are biologists seem to be sometimes to meet children when they're dealing with animals. Maybe they become like an animal or something. Well, what we've done is we've progressed through philosophical psychology. We've seen lots of things. We've seen that, and by the way, keep in mind these properties of man are not demonstrated by other animals. And certainly, as Mortimer Adler said, we can get an animal to do any of these things, although he didn't talk like that. He was talking about, generally about, we can make an animal do things that man can do. There's that famous record, you may have heard it, where, I can never remember this man's name, he's a comedian. And they were in some kind of a factory where, I don't know whether you've heard this, but it is said that if they had sufficient monkeys typing, sooner or later they'll end up typing the Bible. Well, one fellow says, hey Joe, I think number 69's got something. Come and have a look at this. What's he got? To be is not to be. That is the quit, you yop. So, you don't know what they're going to do. If we train them to do things, we're training them for our sake, remember, not for their sake. We educate a child for its sake. So we progressed through this, and we saw first the necessity of the soul, a distinct kind of form in living things. That soul we proved then in man, we showed the proof, how you could prove that there's a soul in living things. Then we showed that in man it is a very special kind of soul, far greater than any other animal or any other vegetative being, plant. No matter how perfect a tree is, it's got a soul, a vegetative soul, very limited, only 3 operations: nutrition, growth, generation. The soul of an animal is far more complex. It can have, according to such a vast array of animals, from the invertebrates, those without a backbone, to the vertebrates. And the highest vertebrates have 5 external senses and 4 internal senses. Remember? Now this is a perfection of the animal kingdom, but those with no internal senses, like an oyster. We used to say it's a rowdy thing. It makes a noise by stamping its foot on the ocean floor. But the oyster isn't like it used to be. So it's if it's got another power of operation called an operative power, like taste, that's a different being. So we go up through all these gradations of beings. There are myriads of them. The invertebrates are so vast, so many, that it's practically impossible to count them, and they're discovering them all the time. Those without backbones, those with a shell on, those without a shell, those might be in like an oyster or a crab or something else. But then we come to man. Man is infinitely above these other things. He's got rational life, which means intellect and will. Those 2 powers can do anything that other things can do. It can reason and reason and reason. Even some people have talked, like Dr. J.B. Ryan, R-H-E-I-N, has spoken about the transference of thoughts, extrasensory perception at a distance, and all that sort of thing. Even some have accused animals of doing that. It's a very strange thing. In his book, he gives an instance of people coming home from an outing where there was some big gathering, some celebration, and they all suddenly grew quiet and didn't know why. Everybody wanted to be quiet, whereas before they were singing. Then suddenly they sensed the two horses were uneasy, jumping almost. Something was wrong. Something was disturbing them, disturbing the horses. When they got round a bend, round the mountain, there's their house burning to the ground. It's difficult to explain things like that, difficult to give some explanation. Whatever it is probably beyond reason. It might be some other spirit in the spirit world informing us, disturbing the horses. Who knows? At least we know this. It's something beyond what a horse can do normally and what a man can do normally. It may be extrasensory perception, but flames don't give us extrasensory perception. Something has warned us. Like the mother, another example he gives. The mother's playing bridge. She gets uneasy. She says, can I phone she had a maid or a babysitter or something. And she said, how's the baby? She says, all right, ma'am. I put her to bed and she's sleeping okay, no problem. So the mother goes back playing bridge. Then she becomes very uneasy. And she phones again. And she hears a scream. The baby's found hanging out of the bassinet by its neck. The maid didn't know, but the mother knew. The baby was saved, thank goodness. But such things do happen. How do we know? We can't explain them. All we can say is that there is some means of communication. And the soul being spiritual, non-material, at least lends a better hand at explaining than the soul of an animal would. But how does an animal get uneasy like that? Goodness only knows. It could be, and a most likely explanation is that other spiritual things do explain it. Did somebody have? Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't know if this is on the same wavelength, but what happens if you have a dream?
Please speak up for the microphone. The microphone here. Speak up.
Oh, okay. What happens if you have a dream about somebody that you knew from high school years and years and years ago, and you never saw this person? This happened to me, and I'm from St. Catharines. And then years later, I lived in Toronto, and I dreamt about this girl, and the very next day I saw her on the subway. And I'm just wondering, what would that mean anything?
No. First of all, what you dream about comes from your past, or the matter of the dream is the imagination. Well, at some time or another, she was in your imagination. Take this case, which is in a way similar. I was in my office at Niagara University one day, and I was thinking, suddenly somebody crossed my mind. I don't know, hadn't seen for quite a long time. Then I heard a knock at the door, and I opened the door, and they're standing the other side of the door. I nearly fell over. I got such a shock. Hadn't seen the person for a long time. I can't remember who it was now. Dr. Bonnet said, that's uncanny. Well, whether it's canny or uncanny, I don't know, but it certainly rocked me at the time. But these things come out of the past. They can be pure coincidences, you know.
They're prophetic, though. I had a dream about my father drinking a lot of water, and I woke up at 7 o'clock in the morning and decided to call my mother, and it turned out that he was having, his lungs were filling up with liquid because he was having heart failure.
Yeah.
I mean, that was no coincidence.
No, that's true.
It was a nightmare.
Now notice it was your father.
Yes.
Notice that. That's
And
what we
it sounds
call
like what happened to her is the same kind of thing. I mean, it's the timing.
love by connaturality, like nature, your own father. You'll be more attentive to that kind of thing, or somebody you loved. It's more likely that that'll happen to you for somebody you love, not just from anybody, but you being his daughter, you were sympathetic, and somehow there's a communication. Aristotle spoke about this. Sort of like natures communicate. You see? My dad used to play a trick, as a matter of fact. He had something like this, and you'd have to read his mind, but he had a trick the way he did it. But then when something real happens to him, you know, I've sort of had an uneasiness.
The question I had too is you mentioned the horses. Isn't it true, well, I think it is true, that horses can sense if you're afraid of them?
Oh yes.
You have to,
We emit odours, etc. We emit all sorts of odours that animals can smell fear in us. I've heard it said that snakes are particularly apt at that. They can smell that. And, you know, it's because, what is it said about bears? I read it reading one time. If you've got no chance of escaping the bear, you put your hands up and make yourself look big. And the bear's not quite sure whether he should tackle you or not, you see? Well,
They say talk to the bear too.
talk to it, yes.
that would take tremendous presence of mind.
Wouldn't it, eh? Didn't I mention last class about Father Woodbury facing a bull one day on a farm? He faced that bull, and the bull was a champion bull. It was its head was Marengo was the head. Its head was the one they used for the Australian Illawarra Shorthorn Championships for the bulls, and standard. And it was pawing the ground and lowering, and I could see its eyes going red. And I'm standing about from here to the corner. No, I'm not quite that far. And I'm watching this, and I said, Elaine, I said to my wife, get Joe, the farmhand. I thought Joe would grab a whip or something, and of course the bull would back off, I thought. I don't know whether it would have or not. But Father Woodbury just fixed its eye on it, and he bent down and picked up a lump of wood, about that big, thick piece of wood, lying on the ground. And the bull didn't go another step further. He wasn't sure what Woodbury would do with that stick. But that man knew animals. He brought up on the farm, and he bred cattle, and he knew them. But animals can sense when you're afraid. Apparently we emit an odour. It's a funny thing, they just discovered, what was it, that plants, when they're chopped, what was it again? Just recently there's something about that. They emit methyl salicylate. Haven't we talking about that? Methyl salicylate? Rubbing it on your hand. It's really the forerunner in a way of aspirin. Aspirin is acetyl salicylic acid. Well, this is the salicylate, methyl salicylate, that plants give off, apparently, under some conditions, when there's something happening. It's been found that, for instance, when plants are cut, when a mouse is killed in the presence of a plant, the plant emits a whole lot of electronic disturbances. Lots of things have been discovered about that, but never been fully explained, of course. It's very difficult to explain some of these things. We discover little by little about these plants through the various sciences. But we do know their limitations, that they cannot think, they cannot see, they cannot hear. They have no organs present in plants, whereas animals do have organs present to record sounds, etc. But still they cannot reason from those sounds. We can prove that. As Father Woodbury used to say, the only people that ever claim lots of things about animals have never lived amongst animals. And he had, of course, lived amongst animals. I've been with him amongst, like in mountains with plants and animals and things, and he knew animals. And my dad, when we were kids, if there's a snake to be seen, a deadly snake, he'd come see the brown snake over there. Look at that, see it? Have a look at them. We'd learn about them. I remember him throwing gasoline on an anthill that high, about 5 feet high, just throwing some, and then lighting the gasoline and watching what the ants do. They'd be scurrying everywhere. Theirs was a society of a kind, gregarious we call it. We don't call it a real society. And they're all operating to keep the enemy out and to keep the hive going. And then when the ants get old and decrepit, they kick them out. Same as bees do. In cold and frosty morning, they'll kick them out of the hive in order to protect the whole hive. I had a film when I was at Niagara University years ago. I don't even know what happened to it, but it used to show this very, very carefully, and how they all operated for the good of the species. But that's how man ought to operate, for the good of the species. But governments, what we need is some educated people in the government, not what we've got now. Some of them are little more than growths on the planet. That laughter was by courtesy of Mrs. Venari. Thank you, Mrs. Venari. I'm really pleased that you support me. But men in government The most extraordinary things. What have you? The two things that the two occupations carried out, which are the most important occupations in a nation, yet get no training: government, motherhood. Motherhood, but motherhood comes more naturally to a woman than government comes to some of the men who go in there. They have no aptitude whatsoever, some of them. It's extraordinary, you know. That's it, I'm afraid, my friends. We've come to the end. Now, next class, we're going to start on what, to my mind, is probably one of the greatest problems of this age. This age is an atheistic age. We're going to show that God necessarily exists and prove it to the hilt. This is an age of atheism, and something which I'm dedicated at fighting. Thank you.